At the west end of the St. Thomas Yard at Moore Street was BX Tower. Charlie Beckett talks about his early years with the New York Central.
We're standing here in BX Tower in St. Thomas, and it reminds me of how a lot of railroaders started. As an operator, you would come to the railroad here and ask for a job, and they decide, okay, we'll send you down to see so-and-so, and you can apprentice there. You may have to pay the agent a little bit. I know myself, I went to Shedden and trained with Vince Burry, paid him a few bucks a month, and he trained me in telegraphy and station work. I remember the farmers coming in with their butter and eggs and their chicks, or at least picking up the chicks and sending their eggs and whatnot on the local express and freight train there at Shedden. And the next spring, this railroad hired me on, and then I was sent up and down the line to work towers like this and all the agencies and other towers somewhat similar to this tower. So often, the young men to get on a railroad, they would have to go through this kind of a training system as I did.
Charlie describes some of the duties of the BX Tower operator.
In a tower, this particular tower, it was quite a busy place because the LMPS ran two lines, north-south, through here. The north and southbound trains were on separate tracks, so they crossed the New York Central, which had an eastbound and westbound at right angles out here at the Diamond between Moore Street here and Princess Avenue. So the LMPS was constantly coming and going, and you'd spot the LMPS needing a signal, or if you failed to notice them, that you'd get a phone call from the LMPS, for instance, that the southbound was ready to leave the station. Some of the LMPSs came around from the Talbot Street station just north of this location, across Talbot Street and around the Y here. The tracks still remain here, and would go right by just a few feet from the corner of this building and go right up to the west end of the NYC station there, so the passengers could detrain and catch a New York Central streamliner either to New York or Chicago, and of course pick up passengers at that station who would come in from other points on the New York Central to come over here and say go to London or Port Stanley. So there's that traffic. On the other side, south of the tower here, is the Y track, which connected also to the LMPS, and it was basically used by the switch engine doing interchange and by C&O trains. The Chessie interchanged here. Their whole train would come up the LMPS and come around here under signal from this tower and go through the yard and go out to Niagara Falls, Buffalo area, and the westbounds came in and went back to C&O on the same track. The switch engine at Ross Street was stationed there, and it would be constantly requiring the use of the short stub track, which came across Moore Street and ended at Princess Avenue at a stop block. And quite often that yard engine would want the longer track, and they'd holler, ABX, give us a long track. So you would set a signal out at the west end of town at the bridge out there to red, and then you would allow the switch end to use the eastbound main track for long pulls of switching 50 or 60 cars back and forth up and down town here, putting the gates down, of course. And the westbound track would still be clear, and of course you couldn't run any LMPSs at that point until the switch engine was clear again. So you were busy, constantly changing the routes with these levers here in front of me. I think I've explained most of the operation here. The New York Central eastbound, westbound mains and the entrance to the yard were all controlled by the operator of this tower, by timetable, knowing what trains were where and what was coming, by Ross Street hollering at BX Tower here that, hey, we need to do this, or we're going to do that next, we're going to go around the Y, or we're going over here to the LMPS, or whatever. So you would always be taking these orders and instructions from Ross Street, and of course the mainline trains by timetable. So it was a busy place. You'd run quite a few hundred lever moves in any given 8 hours at this round-the-clock station, right up till in the mid-70s. It was a very busy place.
VX was what was referred to in railroad jargon as an interlocking tower.
The interlocking itself is an English invention, and when you pull a lever here, you can only pull it if the other levers were in the proper sequence to allow you to get the route. In other words, you couldn't run an LMPS at the same time as you were running a New York Central. There was a safety feature in the interlocker. That's the key word. This interlocking bed in front of us, all those little steel shafts run back and forth with little stoppers on them, and at certain points they won't let another lever do the same thing. So it protected against the operator making a mistake and trying to get two trains going together into the side of each other or whatever. You couldn't do it.
Some shifts may have been busier than others, but the BX Tower operator had a busy time and had his work cut out for him.
The actual levers did move the pipeline. The pipeline would run to a switch or a signal or a lock, okay? There was only three operations they would do. If they ran to a switch, there would have to be some locks there too to lock it so it couldn't bounce around and it would keep those points in the position you'd put it. If you put the switch open, it had to stay open. So you pull in a switch with one of these black levers here, like 15, 14, and 20 with the crossovers here. Okay, you pull that in, and then you would lock it with the appropriate lock, like 18 or 19, would lock it up so it couldn't move again. And then you were able to, say, run an LMPS over here, and you would take the derail off there, and that would be locked up. And then you could finally give a signal, like number 39, for the LMPS to go south or go north.
Not only did this tower demand a sharp mind, the nature of the work also called for a strong, healthy body.
You had to get rid of what was in the way, okay? If you had a move that wasn't consistent with the next move you want to make, you'd get rid of that one. You have to throw the levers back in certain sequence. The locks came undone first, the blue ones. Then you get rid of the switches that were in the way. Then you were able to pick out a route that was going to take care of the thing you want to do. And it would control a lever as far as a quarter of a mile away. For instance, the LMPS derail for the south end was way down there, and it took a tremendous amount of strength to pull this lever over, and the pipe went downstairs and out along the tracks and down along the LMPS, way down beyond almost down to Wellington Street there, and you were moving all that pipeline manually by hand to move a switch, okay? So in bad weather, in snowy or frosty weather, you had a heck of a time because the grease was hardened and you had snow in the way or ice in the way. So it was quite a job for manual, even for strength. Even in good weather, you would be worn out when you got done a shift at a tower like this.
In addition to the interlocking plant, operators at VX and other locations on the main line were required to report train movements.
This tower did report New York Central trains going by to the dispatcher, say VX number 50 by here at 10:22 or whatever, okay? And then, of course, an eastbound train, and a minute or two later, it's at the station. But this was the last reported OS for eastbounds. Both freights and passengers had to be reported here. So you're always also reporting trains. Only to the NYC. You didn't report to the LMPS or the Chessie. Okay, you reported to the New York Central dispatcher who was up in that building. Other locations like at Comber and certain reporting stations, they were required in the timetable to report the passing of any train, every train that went by. And when they're there, they would come on and say, Comber extra 5721 west by Comber at 11:21. They would have the standard clock on the wall, and they had a telegraph key in the station up and down the line up until the 70s, and they could also get standard time on that.